On the evening of October 22, 1989, the small town of St. Joseph, Minnesota, was settling in for the end of the weekend. It was a place where the American dream felt tangible and safe, a town of just a few thousand people where neighbors knew each other by name and children played outside until the streetlights came on. That illusion of perfect safety, that profound sense of community, was about to be shattered forever. 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling rode his bike home from a nearby convenience store with his brother and a friend. It was a simple, quiet Sunday night, one that should have ended with homework, television, and the familiar comfort of their own beds. But somewhere along that familiar country road, in the gathering dusk, Jacob Wetterling disappeared without a trace. For nearly 3 decades, no one knew what happened to him, until one man's confession, born from a stunning investigative twist, finally revealed the horrifying truth. Before we go any further, please hit that like button so more people can see this case, and subscribe to the channel with all notifications on. That way, you'll never miss a cold case investigation. We also want to know where you're watching from, so let us know in the comments. Every comment, every share, helps keep these stories from fading into history. It was a crisp, clear autumn evening in central Minnesota. The kind of night when you could smell the sharp scent of wood smoke on the air and hear the dry rustle of leaves moving through the harvested cornfields. 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling was spending the weekend with his family, his parents, Jerry and Patty Wetterling, and his siblings, Amy and Trevor. The Wetterlings lived in a rural area outside of St. Joseph, a white house set back from the road, surrounded by open space. That Sunday, October 22nd, had started like any other, filled with the simple joys of childhood. The boys had watched a movie at home and then decided to ride to a local Tom Thumb convenience store, just a half-mile away, to rent a video and buy some candy. It was an easy ride they had made countless times. Jacob, his younger brother Trevor, just 10, and their friend Aaron Larson, 11, set off on their bikes around 8 p.m. The sun had set, and the air was getting cold, but the route was short, familiar, and, they believed, perfectly safe. They bought their candy and rented their video, chatted with the clerk, and began pedaling back home. They turned off the main paved road onto the dirt road, a shortcut known as 80th Street South, that led directly to their driveway. They were only minutes from home, a bubble of light and warmth in the rural darkness. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the trees lining the road, a dark silhouette against the fading light. He was wearing a mask, and in his hand he held a gun. The stranger's voice was low and guttural. He ordered the boys to throw their bikes into the ditch and lay face down on the ground. He walked over to them and demanded to know their ages, one by one. The boys, paralyzed with terror, answered. "You too," he barked, pointing his gun at Trevor and Aaron, the 2 younger boys. "Run to those woods and don't look back. And whoever looks back will get shot." The 2 younger boys scrambled to their feet, crying, and did exactly as they were told. They ran as fast as they could into the darkness of the nearby woods, stumbling over roots, not daring to look back. They heard the man's voice one last time, asking Jacob his age. Then, nothing. An oppressive, terrifying silence settled over the field, broken only by the sound of their own frantic breathing. When they finally dared to stop, to look back toward the road, the man and Jacob were gone. Within minutes, panic ripped through the Wetterling home. Trevor and Aaron burst through the front door, hysterical, shouting that Jacob had been taken by a man with a gun. Patty and Jerry's world stopped. It was a nightmare made real. Jerry grabbed a flashlight and raced down the dark driveway, screaming Jacob's name into the cold night air, his voice swallowed by the vast, empty fields. Patty called 911. Neighbors, hearing the commotion and the desperate cries, emerged from their homes. Within an hour, the quiet countryside, usually filled with the sound of crickets, was swarming with squad cars, their flashing red and blue lights a terrible new constellation in the rural darkness. Deputies and volunteers began arriving, carrying lanterns and flashlights, fanning out into the night. The next morning, the story dominated the local and then national news. A child had been stolen from a peaceful Minnesota town, and no one had seen where he went. The community of St. Joseph, population barely 3,000, transformed overnight. The illusion of safety was gone, replaced by a cold fear. Parents who had never locked their doors now bolted them. Children were no longer allowed to ride bikes alone or walk to school without supervision. Over the next several days, the search became a massive operation. Hundreds of volunteers, farmers on tractors, firefighters, classmates, and strangers, formed human chains and trudged through fields, barns, culverts, and ditches. Helicopters scanned the terrain from above. Police set up roadblocks, interviewing anyone who passed through the area, but it yielded nothing. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, no fibers, and no witnesses who could identify the masked man beyond the terrified account of two young boys. Jacob Wetterling seemed to have vanished into thin air. The Stearns County Sheriff's Office and the FBI quickly joined the search, setting up a command center. Within days, they had collected hundreds of tips. The phone line rang constantly. Some thought the abductor was a local farmer. Others suspected a traveling worker. The FBI created a psychological profile. A man familiar with the area, comfortable in this rural terrain, likely a loner, and almost certainly with a history of sexual offenses. Investigators searched nearby quarries. They brought in dive teams for the rivers. They even drained small bodies of water. They questioned every known sex offender in the region. But every lead, every interview, hit a dead end. Weeks turned into agonizing months. The search scaled back, but the family's pain was constant. Patty Wetterling, her face etched with a pain that no parent should ever know, became a fixture on television, pleading for her son's return. Her voice, trembling yet astonishingly determined, became a symbol of every parent's nightmare. Jerry kept working with volunteers, organizing search parties that went on long after official efforts faded. As Christmas approached, the family, in a defiant act of hope, decorated a small tree near the driveway where Jacob was taken, hanging blue ribbons for him. The community followed suit. Across Minnesota, front porches, schools, and stores displayed blue ribbons, a quiet, powerful act of hope and a silent prayer that the boy would come home. The case consumed the Wetterlings' lives. They refused to give up hope. They refused to let Jacob be forgotten. His story reached national attention, appearing on America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries. Celebrities and politicians shared his photo. Still, no solid leads emerged. In 1990, about a year after the abduction, a man named Danny Heinrich was questioned by the police. He lived nearby, matched the general description, and drove a car similar to one seen acting suspiciously near the abduction site in the weeks prior. Investigators were hopeful. They took samples of his tires and shoes, but the forensic science of the time was limited. They couldn't make a definitive connection. Heinrich denied everything, and with no hard evidence to hold him, he was released. The trail went cold again, this time for decades. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, law enforcement continued to chase rumors and false sightings. Jacob's face, aged by forensic artists, appeared on milk cartons, posters, and in countless news segments. His 12th birthday came and went. Then his 16th. Then his 21st. Each time a child was found safe or another suspect was arrested elsewhere in the country, the Wetterlings' phone would ring, their hearts leaping only to be crushed again. But it was never Jacob. As the years passed, the case became one of the most haunting cold cases in America. Patty and Jerry turned their unimaginable pain into a powerful purpose. They founded the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, an organization dedicated to child safety and the prevention of abductions. They became fierce advocates, lobbying tirelessly in Washington. Their efforts led directly to the passage of the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act in 1994. This landmark federal law was the first of its kind. It required states to implement sex offender registries, the very system we are familiar with today. Jacob's case, in its agonizing tragedy, had already begun to change America, making millions of other children safer. By 2014, 25 years had passed. The case was ice cold. Jacob would have been 36 years old. That's when investigators, armed with new perspectives and new technology, decided to re-examine everything. And in doing so, they noticed a disturbing pattern that had been overlooked decades earlier. Months before Jacob's abduction, several boys in the nearby town of Paynesville had been assaulted by a masked man with a gun. The description was eerily similar. Same area, same low, guttural voice, same method. In 1989, these cases were treated as separate. Now, investigators saw them as a timeline, a terrifying escalation leading directly to Jacob. Here is the critical turning point, the incredible twist that finally broke the case. In one of those Paynesville assaults, the attacker had left behind DNA evidence on the victim's clothing. At the time, DNA testing was in its infancy and yielded no results. But now, in 2014, detectives resubmitted that old evidence for modern, advanced testing. And this time, they got a hit. The DNA profile pointed back to one man, Danny Heinrich, the same man who had been questioned and released back in 1990. Heinrich was immediately placed under 24/7 surveillance. In July 2015, investigators finally had enough to arrest him, but, crucially, not for Jacob's murder. There was still no direct evidence linking him to that. They arrested him on 25 counts of federal child pornography found on his computer. This was the leverage they needed. For months, while Heinrich was in federal custody, detectives pressed him. They told him about the DNA match from Paynesville. They pressed him about Jacob. For months, he denied involvement. Then, in September 2016, after 27 years of silence, facing a lifetime in prison on the pornography charges, Danny Heinrich's wall of silence finally crumbled. He agreed to talk. He agreed to confess in exchange for a deal. The confession was the twist no one saw coming, not in its entirety. It was the end of all hope and the beginning of the truth. In chilling, sickening detail, Heinrich described what happened that night in 1989. He had been driving aimlessly through St. Joseph when he saw the three boys riding their bikes. He confessed to the Paynesville assaults, and then he confessed to Jacob. He admitted he handcuffed Jacob, forced him into his car, and drove to a remote gravel pit near Paynesville. There, in the darkness, he sexually assaulted the 11-year-old boy. He said that during the assault, Jacob, crying, asked, "What did I do wrong?" Heinrich claimed that moments later, he saw a police car drive past on the nearby highway. He panicked. He told Jacob to turn around, and he shot him. He buried the body in a shallow grave and drove home. A few days later, paranoid he would be discovered, he returned, moved the body, and buried it again in a field. For 27 years, that secret stayed buried. But as part of a complex plea deal, Heinrich agreed to lead authorities to the exact site. In exchange, he would plead guilty to the one federal pornography charge, and the state of Minnesota would agree not to charge him with Jacob's murder, a charge that, even with the confession, might have been impossible to prove in court after so much time. Investigators and forensic teams followed Heinrich, in handcuffs, to a field under a lone tree. And there, they unearthed Jacob's remains, his hockey jacket, and his dental records confirmed his identity. After 27 years, the search for Jacob Wetterling was finally over. When the news broke, Minnesota froze. The community that had held onto blue ribbons of hope for a miracle instead received closure in the most devastating way possible. In court, Heinrich, as part of the deal, publicly admitted to the kidnapping, assault, and murder of Jacob Wetterling. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison on the child pornography charge, the maximum allowed. During the sentencing, Patty Wetterling spoke directly to him, her voice filled with a strength that captivated the nation. "You took away our sunshine," she said through tears. "You hurt so many people. But you can't take away the light that Jacob brought to this world. Jacob, we will not let you be defined by how you died. We will define you by how you lived." Jerry Wetterling added that the confession, though agonizing, allowed the family to finally bring Jacob home and give him the burial he deserved. Jacob Wetterling's case changed America. His disappearance sparked national outrage and a complete reform in how missing child cases were handled. The Jacob Wetterling Act, born from his parents' pain, became the foundation for all modern sex offender registries. His story is a painful lesson in the power of persistence, community involvement, and the agonizingly slow march of justice. The Wetterling family continues to advocate for child protection. Patty often says that while the story ended in tragedy, Jacob's spirit lives on through the lives saved because of the lessons learned from his case. She urges parents, the world is not a scarier place. We are just more aware. We can't love our children in fear. We must love them with hope. The case of Jacob Wetterling is more than a story about loss. It's about how one family's unimaginable pain was forged into a shield to protect children they would never meet. It's about time, truth, and the power of never giving up, even when the answers seem impossible to find, even when they are buried under 27 years of lies. Jacob's memory reminds us that behind every cold case file is a human life, a child, a parent, a story worth remembering. So tonight, as the sun sets over the quiet fields of St. Joseph, Minnesota, one can almost hear the echo of children's laughter that once filled those roads, a haunting, bittersweet reminder of an innocence lost, but through an entire nation's vigilance, never forgotten. What do you think about this case and the plea deal that led to the confession? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, but please keep them respectful to Jacob's memory and his family. If you'd like to see more true crime stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so that more people can learn about these stories, and maybe, just maybe, help bring answers to other families still waiting for justice.